Well, hello everybody. Welcome to the 2010s presentation of major US and world events. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this presentation, and this is your life. You probably remember a lot of these things. So let's take a trip down memory lane, and hopefully, like I said, you do remember some of this stuff, and you can relate. And again, hopefully you enjoy the presentation. All right. 2010, we have the Haiti earthquake, which is a terrible thing. Of course, if there's one country in the world that doesn't need an earthquake to destroy its already frail infrastructure, it's Haiti, one of the poorest countries in the world. An oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. The movie Avatar becomes the best-selling movie ever worldwide, with $1.84 billion made from that movie. Can you imagine that? 3D TVs are launched worldwide. The longest tennis match in history happens at 10 hours. The Apple iPad is released. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1 is released. And the Chilean miners, who were stuck 2,300 feet underground for over 2 months, are finally rescued. Talk about a crazy, harrowing event, and they made a movie based on this. But wow, talk about crazy stuff. Here are pictures of the earthquake in Haiti and the mass devastation that it caused. The oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Of course, when oil spills, oil and water don't mix, and so you see patterns like that in the water, and it does some crazy things to the plant and animal life. But that is one of the risks you run when you transport oil in big tankers on the ocean. And the Apple iPad is released. Well, a lot of us have had iPads in our homes, and kind of a cool thing, right? Kind of like having a smaller version of a computer, right, in your hand. And of course, our cell phones are that today as well, but iPads are a lot of fun. In in 2011, Japan suffers from massive effects of an earthquake and tsunami off its coast. And wow, and the devastation was enormous, and the cleanup was, was and is still ongoing, but was quite an effort. Okay, as you can imagine, Osama bin Laden is killed. Uh, Muammar Gaddafi, the former dictator of Libya, is killed, and William and Kate have the royal wedding. And the Japanese nuclear plant is damaged, and so obviously, anytime a nuclear plant is damaged, and the nuclear um, waste and material is leaked out or exposed, of course that's damaging for everything. But yeah, these were some of the major events of 2011. Here's the Japan earthquake. An earthquake happened out in the ocean, caused tsunami waves, and for the towns that were near, on the coast there, and Japan's a series of islands, and so a lot of the towns are on the coast, but the ones that were in the path of these tsunami waves just got obliterated. And I mean, look at the destruction there on the picture on the right. And can you imagine if you're living, in one of these places on the left, and you see these waves coming at you, and I mean, just these walls of water coming at you? Crazy. We have some friends who lived in our neighborhood at this time, and the woman is Japanese. Well, her parents were still over in Japan, and their town was one of the ones affected by this event. And so our friends moved from our neighborhood to live with her parents in Japan for a year, and try to help with the cleanup and so forth in the aftermath. It was crazy, but and they're still cleaning things up, from this. And it takes many years for places to recover from things like this. So even though it's not on the front page of the news anymore, it doesn't mean the effects still aren't felt. And here's Osama bin Laden, a picture of him on the left. Of course, we were told that he was one of the masterminds behind the 9/11 attacks. Uh, he was reportedly killed by Navy SEAL Team 6 in 2011. They make a raid on a compound that was reportedly his, and they shoot and kill a guy they say is him, and dump his body out in the middle of the ocean. So we never saw the body. Well, maybe it was him. Some reports are that he had actually died as early as 2002 of a disease called Marfan disease. And so, don't know for sure. I can't quite sit here and tell you with exactness what happened. But at any rate, we are told that Bin Laden is killed, and the world celebrates because he was seen as the biggest terrorist in the world at the time. And the royal wedding, William and Kate. Of course, William is the son of Prince Charles and the late Princess Diana. Prince Charles is, of course, the son of Queen Elizabeth II, which makes Prince William the grandson of Queen Elizabeth II, and he marries Kate. And boy, Americans, if you wanted to watch the royal wedding, which many people did, you were up at 2 or 3 in the morning, and boy, anything with the royal family is kind of interesting, kind of a big deal for a lot of people. So this was quite the event, right, to watch a royal wedding. In 2012, Barack Obama is reelected to a second term as president. There is a school shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, which is shocking. Attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi, Libya, which is also shocking. And there's an official narrative story that we are told the reason it happened, and then other stories come out later as to that contradict that official narrative, and new details and new evidence has come out that make it look like the attack was much more than just what was reported. And also, the London Olympics happened in 2012. Here is Obama, elected to a second term. He will uh, be sworn in for his second term in January of 2013 and leave the White House in January of 2017. And then the shooting in Connecticut. And of course, anytime you see images like this of kids, and this was at an elementary school, and many people die and are injured, but anytime you see kids involved, of course, it's going to pull at the heartstrings, and it should. But this was a bizarre event that took place. And a picture of the London festivities, the London Olympics. Like we talked about before, every Olympics tries to kind of outdo the previous one, right? For the opening ceremonies, the closing ceremonies, and you know, they it's a big to do, right? But the Olympics are a big deal. You're trying to get the world together for a couple of weeks of goodwill and peace and fun, and they are a lot of fun to watch. In 2013, the Obamacare initiative is rolled out and released, and this was basically it was a healthcare initiative. A lot of people saw it as more of a move towards socialized or nationalized healthcare. For some people that were benefited by Obamacare, they thought it was great. For a lot of people, they saw it just as a big government move, and they didn't like it. And so Obamacare overall, whether it's been a success or a failure, probably depends on if it's worked for a certain person or not. But anyway, it was very controversial, no doubt. The Boston Marathon bombing happens. Talk about bizarre event again. You guys have lived through so many crazy times and bizarre events in your short lives. It's really remarkable. The NSA scandal. It came out that the National Security Agency was spying on people illegally, Americans illegally, listening to phone calls and reading private you know texts and things that the NSA didn't have constitutional authority to do. And so that was a big deal, especially for people who are big time into protecting civil liberties and civil rights and so forth. The typhoon in the Philippines. Nelson Mandela and Margaret Thatcher also pass away in 2013. Two storied great leaders of their respective nations, Nelson Mandela of South Africa and Margaret Thatcher of Great Britain. Here's a picture of the Boston Marathon bombing, massive damage, major injuries, death involved. A couple of, we were told, brothers, terrorists, used basically a pressure cooker as a bomb and blew it up. And one of the guys one of the terrorists brothers will die. The other one will be chased down on a manhunt over a couple of day period and finally be killed. But I mean, this is crazy. Again, we live in an era where these things have become much more commonplace. I wish they weren't. In the old days, if stuff like this happened, at least it wasn't reported because maybe there weren't as many news outlets and stuff. But I tend to think, big stuff like this just didn't happen as much perhaps in the old days. But it does now. It does now. And there are crazy people out there who do these things for whatever reason. Um, but also when you have incidents like this, you have heroism show up in the form of regular people doing above and beyond great things to help other people. People that are selfless and are willing to sacrifice sometimes their own lives to save other people. And so we see the worst and best sides of humanity when we see things like this. The typhoon in the Philippines causes massive damage. Of course, the Philippines is also a series of islands, a bunch of islands, and a lot of the villages and towns are built on the coastlines. And of course, if you have a typhoon, which is like a hurricane, if you have these high winds and it causes the ocean to come in and rise and the big waves hit, it's going to cause major damage, especially in a third world country where the infrastructure is not nearly as strong as it is in some other places. And here is Nelson Mandela and Margaret Thatcher. Very strong-willed, courageous leaders in their own right, and they both pass away. But uh, yeah, two of the great leaders, I think, um, in a lot of ways, in their own ways, of the 20th century. In 2014, we have the bizarre disappearance of a Malaysian airline flight full of people. And I'll show you a picture in just a minute, but it was reportedly took off from Malaysia, bound for Beijing, China. Not far off the coast of Malaysia, out in the middle of the ocean, it went down, disappeared, and nobody could find any evidence or remnants of it, and it was just really crazy. The Iranian nuclear debate: should Iran be allowed to develop nuclear weapons or not? Okay, and that rages on in 2014. And Russians in Ukraine. Ukraine had been part of Russia, a part of the Soviet Union, I should say, during the Soviet era. But Ukraine is now its own independent nation. So what was going on in the Ukraine was Russia trying to take it back over, or what was happening? That was pretty bizarre and cause for extreme debate as well. ISIS terrorizes the Middle East. This uh, terrorist group, obviously well funded, and they're running around the Middle East and causing havoc, death, destruction, and we were told, well, we can't really do much about it, and they're and anyway, we were told that, of course, and that happens through much of the Obama administration. The second term, when President Trump gets in, he will direct more military efforts at eradicating ISIS, and pretty well do by and large. And then the Ebola outbreak in Africa, which is extremely scary, a terrible virus uh, that is very, very deadly, and it causes a lot of death and a lot of havoc during this time. There's a picture of the Malaysian flight, and again, trying to find an airplane, especially if something is sunk in the ocean, trying to find something like that in the middle of an ocean is like finding a needle in a haystack. And 227 passengers, you can see, uh, including 2 infants and 12 crew members. Also, they all, of course, perish in this flight. And the Ebola outbreak, right? So over in Africa, really scary and very deadly. But yeah, we just it's crazy. We're seeing, of course, we're in the middle right now of a virus scare, and Ebola in 2014. We'll talk in just a minute about Zika, another virus. And so, boy, in your short lifetime, you've seen a lot of these too. You've seen more of these types of outbreaks of these crazy viruses than uh, most older people have in their lifetime. Up to this point. So, kind of bizarre the era in which we live with so many things happening around us, but it is what it is. In 2015, the Russians joined the civil war that's happening in Syria. The Russians are reported to want to keep Assad, the Syrian president, in power, where ISIS is trying to just cause havoc and get him out of power. The U.S. is over there as well, and some other countries are there as well. And it was just crazy. Those poor Syrian people, what they've had to put up with. Iran's nuclear deal is finished. We are told that it's going to be under very strict conditions, that Iran's going to be able to develop some nuclear things, but reports come out that they're developing much more than they're supposed to be, and their facilities are not checked up on near as often as they should be. There's all kinds of reports that have come out over the last number of years, but anyway, Iran and nuclear weapons. Interesting combination, right? Terrorist attacks in Paris and San Bernardino, California. ISIS claims responsibility for both. And so all of a sudden the world is put on alert, if we weren't already, that ISIS is maybe not just in the Middle East, but ISIS fighters have gone into Europe, and many of them under the quote unquote refugee tag, and that maybe there are ISIS cells in the United States of people who are loyal to ISIS and or just loyal to terrorism, perhaps. And so this is a wake-up call, no doubt about it, for the world. And then, of course, like I said, that in 2015 we have the refugee crisis in Europe. Refugees are really defined by people who are trying to flee their native country for protection because of a war, a famine, something like that. But and a lot of people in the Middle East did flee to Europe at this time who were legitimate refugees. But also, as it's turned out, a lot of people under this refugee tag were not necessarily needing to flee their homelands. They were just people trying to get into Europe, into more stable environments, and they weren't necessarily. A lot of these guys are single men, young men to middle-aged men who, you know, uh, are trying to get into a new place, and just because. And so refugee, non-refugee, it's an interesting term. People debate over who is a refugee, who is not. But anyway, that's what was going on in 2015 as Europe saw floods of people come in, whether it be Germany, Italy, France, the UK, all over. Okay, and so and it causes some interesting dynamics and some interesting challenges, to say the least. Here's a picture of the terrorist attacks in Paris, some of the aftermath. Over 130 people are dead. What's interesting is that there obviously were coordinated attacks that night. The major one was at a rock concert, but there are also attacks in other parts of the city at the same time. So on November the 13th is when this occurs. In 2016, the war in Syria rages on. Brazil and South Korea impeach their presidents for corruption and scandals. North Korea missile and nuclear tests are performed. And of course, that puts the United States and the free world on alert. Brexit occurs. Britain votes to leave the European Union. The people of Great Britain voted to leave the EU, which is a coalition of European countries. And interestingly enough, none of the European countries that are in the EU ever voted to get in. Okay, it was never a formal vote to join the European Union. They were just told they were in. And Britain, at least the people of Britain, said, no, we want to be out. We don't want the European Union and its bureaucrats and politicians making laws for our country, which they were doing. And we think our laws need to be made by Parliament and the traditional way that we've always done things. And so the people of Britain voted to leave, but some of the powers that be tried to delay and prolong this whole thing, and this went on for a few years. This delay, and like I said, some of the higher powers that be that didn't want Britain to leave the EU have tried to basically undo the people's vote and not let them leave. The Zika virus becomes a major story. So you had Ebola, now you have Zika, and Zika is going to be in much of Latin America, also over in Africa in a few places, and carried by mosquitoes. Makes people very sick. It um, has an effect on pregnant mothers and newborn children as well at the time, and so this is another scary virus that occurs. Okay, and then against all odds, Donald Trump wins the election in for to become our 45th U.S. president. And so let's look at a couple of these more in depth. Zika virus, and you can see what the World Health Organization says, the places where it was focused and concentrated. Again, reportedly carried by mosquitoes, and um, and this virus makes someone very sick and can have an effect on newborn children as well. And here is President Trump, a kind of a real estate mogul in New York City for really decades. Uh, Trump defeats Hillary Clinton to become the 45th president, and so many of the surveys and the polls that were taken were saying, "Oh no, he doesn't have a chance." From the beginning, when he announced that he wanted to run, first he had to win the Republican nomination, which nobody thought he could do, or at least that's what the media was telling us. And then once he won the nomination, he goes up against Clinton, and of course, the media is telling us he doesn't have a chance to win either, and he pulls off the victory. His stance on things, his agenda, his platform was really, a return to Americana. Put America first. We're going to redo a lot of these trade deals that we have with other countries that he thought we were getting ripped off with over the years. He's going to try to bring back American jobs, American companies to the U.S., some of which had outsourced to other countries, and he really wanted to focus on the economy, and that's what he did. In 2017, you had the really bizarre, shocking Las Vegas concert shooting, and you know um, it was a country music concert in Las Vegas, outdoor concert, and um, we were told that a guy was shooting from way up in Mandalay Bay with high-powered rifles and was shooting people down below at the concert. And some reports even came out that people that were at the concert reported on the ground while shots were firing from above. Um, on the ground, there were shots being fired as well. So we may never know the full story of what came out of what happened that night, but that Las Vegas concert shooting is shocking, no doubt. This is the year that some NFL players before games start taking a knee during the national anthem. And this is very controversial. People, are, on both sides of the debate, whether it's okay or not to do this, and is this American or is this anti-American? And the NFL ratings plummet, their merchandise sales go down. This is a big hit. There is a major blowback on the NFL because of this, because a lot of a lot of NFL fans, longtime NFL fans, who also consider themselves hardcore, traditional, idealistic Americans said, "Hey, whoa, you can't do this." And so this was a big deal, no doubt. We had hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria all on the Gulf Coast wreaking havoc that season. And then the total solar eclipse. A lot of you remember this one. And you had to have those special glasses to look at the solar eclipse, which was quite a cool event. Um, as soon as Donald Trump gets elected, the Mueller investigation starts, looking into whether Trump and his campaign colluded with Russia to win the election. Um, because some people, some of these what we call maybe deep staters or people who are kind of behind the shadows in government are saying, no, there's no way he could have beaten Clinton in a fair election. That's just impossible. And basically, they're just it's a slap in the face for the Americans who voted for Trump, and they just, they start this investigation, which will really go for about 2 years, at a great expense of taxpayer dollars and all of our time. And well, we'll see what happens with this investigation at the end of this presentation. Here's a scale. You can see of CBS this morning, their news show, they were showing kind of just the outline of Las Vegas, and the shooter was reported to be on the 32nd floor of Mandalay Bay shooting down. And I mean, over 50 people killed, over 200 people hurt. This was the deadliest shooting in U.S. history, uh, and it was shocking, right? And so again, another one of these crazy events. Right? We're kind of told we have to get used to them, and because it just seemed to happen all the time, right? And again, none of us wants to get used to these. We want people just to live in peace and live their lives and do their thing, and yet we have way too many of these kinds of occurrences. And the total solar eclipse. That was pretty cool to see. Doesn't happen very often, does it? But it was pretty neat. In 2018, we have the Winter Olympics in South Korea. And of course, every 2 years you have Olympics of some sort, usually, right? Winter and then summer, and then winter and then summer. And they're always a lot of fun. The Mueller investigation continues. President Trump dedicated a lot more military um, supplies and just military materiel to defeating ISIS, and ISIS is reported as nearly defeated during this time. The stock market hits all-time highs, and we have the most Americans in U.S. history employed during 2018. That was part of the Trump agenda. Was we got to bring jobs back, got to get people going to work, and increase the number of going to work. And we're gonna make it. The job market's going to be zooming, the economy's going to be zooming, the stock market's going to be zooming, and they all were during that time. And then here is the logo of the Olympics in South Korea in 2018. And in 2019, to wrap it up, Avengers Endgame becomes the biggest movie ever in the United States. There is a fire at the Notre Dame Cathedral, one of the historic landmarks in Paris and a world icon. And the final season of Game of Thrones occurs, which was an extremely popular TV show. And the Mueller investigation wraps up, like I said and alluded to earlier, after 2 years of how much money and how much time, and but Mueller concludes that they couldn't find anything uh, proving a collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, and so that's just the end of it, and nothing to see here. And Mueller is made to look like a fool because of this. Um, but these events, to wrap up our decade, pretty crazy stuff. Now let's look at the Notre Dame Cathedral fire in a little more detail in just a second. But first, Endgame, of course, loaded with famous actors and actresses, and the superhero uh, genre of movies really took over during the 2010s and really the 2000s on, right? And these movies they're huge, and people love them, and so there you go. And the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. Like I said, this is an icon, a world icon, landmark. And there's a picture of the blaze that's occurring. The story was that construction workers, a construction crew, was working, near the top of the cathedral, doing some I don't know, some, I guess, construction on, just fixing things up and making things stronger, whatever. But they were up there, and that an accident occurred among the construction crew, and the fire started. And that's what the official narrative was. And some people, think that's what happened, and other people think that's not what happened at all. Other people say, "Oh no, wait a minute, this looks like arson. It looks like this fire was set on purpose." and it looks like this is more of a terrorist type action. Um, Whatever the truth is, uh, the result was that the Notre Dame Cathedral suffered some major damage, and this is this icon is 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 on fire. And so, anyway, that's the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, and uh, this is the summary of the 2010s. So, a lot of you guys probably remember a lot of this stuff, and I hope you enjoyed looking back.